Part 1. The Midnight Train. Tokyo is known for its bustling trains, with millions of commuters traveling across the city daily. Among these, there's a rumor, a legend passed around by night shift workers and late-night commuters, the Midnight Train. It is said that if you board the last train at exactly midnight on certain nights, you might find yourself on a journey from which there's no return. Kaito, a young office worker, had heard this story before, but like most people, he didn't believe it. After a long day at work, he rushed to catch the last train home. The platform was unusually empty, and the night felt eerily quiet. When the train arrived, the doors slid open with a soft hiss. Kaito stepped inside. It looked like any other late-night train. Empty, quiet, with a few tired passengers sitting quietly, nodding off or staring at their phones. Kaito found a seat by the window and settled in, grateful to finally rest. But as the train left the station, something felt wrong. To be continued. For the next part, you can check my bio. Part 2. The Strange Passengers. The lights inside the train began to flicker slightly, though no one seemed to notice. The view outside the window started to blur, as if the train were speeding through a tunnel. But the strange part was, the train wasn't stopping at any of the usual stations. Kaito glanced around, noticing that none of the passengers seemed to care. In fact, they didn't seem to be moving at all, just sitting there perfectly still. Feeling uneasy, Kaito got up and walked toward the conductor's cabin, but the door was locked. As he walked back, he noticed something unsettling. The faces of the passengers were distorted, like blurry photographs. Their expressions were blank, and their eyes were lifeless, staring straight ahead. Panic began to creep in. He checked his phone for the time, but there was no signal. No messages, no internet. It was as if he was completely cut off from the outside world. Kaito hurried to the next car, hoping to find a conductor or some way to get off the train. To be continued. For the next part, check my bio. Part 3. The Changing Train. As Kaito moved through the train cars, he began to notice disturbing changes. The once modern and clean seats were now worn, with dark stains he couldn't identify. The air felt colder, heavy with a strange, oppressive energy. The lights flickered more violently, casting long, twisted shadows along the walls. Each flicker seemed to bring the train further into something unnatural. The passengers, they were no longer the same. Their faces had decayed, their eyes now dark and hollow. Their bodies sat stiff as though frozen in place, with mouths slightly open in silent, endless screams. None of them moved. Kaito's heart raced as dread washed over him. Desperate, he rushed towards the last car, praying to find an exit, someone, anyone, who could help him. But instead he found an old woman, hunched over in the corner, muttering under her breath. Her body swayed back and forth, her face hidden beneath a large cast straw hat. "Excuse me, ma'am," Kaito said, his voice shaking. "Do you know how to get off this train?" The old woman stopped rocking. Slowly she lifted her head, revealing her face, a face that was horribly disfigured with empty, black eyes. "There's no getting off the midnight train," she rasped, her voice like nails scraping against glass. "We're all headed to the same destination." Kaito stumbled back in terror, but when he turned around to run, the exit door was gone. The train was now a closed loop, trapping him inside. To be continued. For the next part, check my bio. Part 4. The Endless Corridor. Kaito's heart pounded in his chest. The train, once familiar, had now become an endless corridor. He looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The windows showed nothing but darkness, an empty void stretching as far as he could see. The doors between the train cars had vanished, and it was as if the walls themselves were closing in. He turned back toward the old woman, but she was gone. In her place was a figure, tall and shadowy, with eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The figure stood still, but Kaito could feel it watching him, its gaze heavy and suffocating. His breath quickened, and his legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move, to run. As he sprinted through the train, the space around him twisted. The once familiar seats and walls stretched and warped, as if the train itself was alive, playing tricks on his mind. He could hear faint whispers in the distance, like the murmurs of lost souls trapped in the darkness. Suddenly, the train slowed, the screech of the brakes echoing through the car. The doors opened with a sharp hiss, and Kaido bolted out. But when he stepped onto the platform, he found himself in a place that was nothing like any station he had ever seen. The platform was cold and desolate, shrouded in a thick fog. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of decay. Through the mist, Kaido saw figures, shadowy, ghostly forms wandering aimlessly, some whispering to themselves, others sobbing quietly. It was then that he realized these weren't just passengers. They were the souls of those who had boarded the midnight train before him. Trapped, forgotten, now he was one of them. To be continued. For the final part, check my bio. Part 5, The Final Destination. Kaido stood frozen on the platform, surrounded by the wandering souls of those who had come before him. The fog clung to him, thick and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. Despair began to settle in his chest as he realized there might be no way out. The figures, some transparent, others barely visible, drifted aimlessly around him, their faces twisted in expressions of sorrow and fear. "Is this my fate?" Kaido whispered to himself, his voice trembling. In the distance he saw a faint light, dim but flickering, as though it were calling to him. With no other option, he followed it, his footsteps echoing on the cold, stone platform. The light led him to an ancient-looking sign, barely visible through the mist. It read, "Final Destination." A figure emerged from the fog. It was the old woman, her disfigured face now calm, her eyes dark but no longer filled with malice. She pointed towards the train, which had not left the platform. "There is one way out," she rasped, "but you must make a choice." Kaido's eyes followed her hand, back to the open doors of the train. He hesitated, unsure of what to do. "If you board again," the old woman continued, "you might escape, but beware. The train does not forgive easily. It may take you deeper into the darkness." Kaido's mind raced. Stay here and become one of the wandering souls? Or risk it all and board the train, hoping it would take him back to the real world? With no other choice, Kaido took a deep breath and stepped back onto the midnight train. The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, and the train began to move once more. The lights flickered, but this time, instead of decaying into darkness, they grew brighter. The windows revealed familiar sights, buildings, stations, streets, places from his daily life. His heart raced with hope. Was he truly returning? The train finally slowed and came to a stop. The doors slid open, and Kaido stepped out into the early morning light of a bustling Tokyo station. The world looked normal again. Commuters rushed past him, oblivious to what he had just experienced. But as he looked back at the train, he noticed something chilling. The passengers still inside the train. They were staring at him. Their faces were lifeless, hollow, their eyes following his every movement. And among them, sitting quietly, was the old woman. The doors closed, and the train disappeared into the tunnel. Kaido was free, but he knew deep down that the midnight train still roamed the city, waiting for its next unsuspecting passenger. Based on a blend of Japanese urban legends and ghost stories, this tale speaks of a cursed train that runs at midnight, taking lost souls to a place where they will forever wander. The midnight train serves as a reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural in Japan's urban folklore. If you're not careful, you might find yourself on a ride you can never escape. Thanks for following along. If you liked the story, feel free to check out more of my bio.